Hello? Today, I'm going to tell you a story that may change your perception of what is real. It's based on events people prefer not to talk about. Listen closely. Let's begin.
Episode 1, The Dream That Came Twice. Hook. They always locked the front door. That night it locked itself from the inside. They had the kind of evening that looks harmless from the sidewalk. Lamps with fabric shades glowed, honey warm behind sheer curtains. A radio on the kitchen counter murmured jazz, too soft to name. The kettle clicked itself off with a practiced sigh. George Harper rinsed 2 cups, turned the mouth down on the old dish towel with embroidered lemons, and listened to the apartment's familiar grammar. The baseboard's winter creak, the fridge's patient hum, the faraway elevator rattling its chain like a sleepy dog. "Tea?" he asked, not raising his voice because in this place the rooms carried sound like neighbors passing plates over a fence. Evelyn sat at the little dinette with its chrome edge and fake marble top. She wore the blue housecoat with the satin piping, the one he'd bought at a Ben Franklin when the world still put price tags on things with a staple gun. She was peeling an orange very carefully, thumb under rind, the way her mother had taught her in '63 when the window screens were new and the cicadas sang like pocket radios. "I'll have the peppermint," she said. "It helps with the—" She gestured vaguely, a circle in the air. "The heartburn," George filled in. He didn't add, "It's worse when you worry." He had learned that the gentlest way to keep a marriage from rattling was to leave a little air around the truth. Outside, November sat heavy over town. The street was a line of muffled lights. Somewhere a bus breathed and pulled away from the curb, its hiss soft as a secret. They had lived in this second-floor apartment since '79 long enough to know which wind brought rain and which brought the smell of the river. Tonight brought a clean cold that made the hallway smell like pennies and old coats. They ate their orange slices with the deliberation of people who've been told to slow down. On the radio, the announcer's velvet voice said something about a midnight jazz block and signed off with a weather report that might have been written in Morse. George turned the dial a little. It had a sweeter resistance than modern things, a friendly friction. "Remember the Esso off Highway 12? He asked, the way people their age did, tossing a rock back down a well to hear the splash. "The one with the blind raccoon," Evelyn said, "and the coffee that tasted like nuts and rain." He smiled. "We'd pull in and leave the engine running, and you'd say, 'Kill it, Georgie, she can hear us breathing.'" "She could," Evelyn said and laughed, and then her hand found his on the table. His was warm and rough and honest. Hers was cool and soft and alert. They stayed like that a long time, 2 old birds on a wire, not minding the wind. They washed up, they brushed their teeth side by side in the mirror with its narrow foxing along the bottom edge, a little cloud of silver that made their mouths sparkle where they shouldn't. They checked the front door deadbolt and chain. They always did. The building had been safe for decades, but habit is comfort that learned to stand up straight. The bedroom was the color of tea with milk. Their wedding photo sat on the dresser in a walnut frame. The bedstead was metal and spoke in quiet clicks when George sat to take off his socks. "You put the album away?" he asked. The box with the old Polaroids had been out on the coffee table for 2 days, a tide of grandchildren and mustaches and Christmas trees spilling in little snapshots. "I did," Evelyn said. "Back in the hall closet. Top shelf. I labeled the lid." "Good girl," he said without thinking, a phrase from the century when they were made. She let it pass. Forgiveness, like the tea, had steeped long. They slept the way married people do when time has had its way with their hips, in companionable parentheses with the long parenthesis of the pillow dividing their breath. Somewhere deep in the building a pipe ticked like a cooling car. And then the dream came. It did not announce itself with nightmare theatrics. No falling, no teeth, no sudden nakedness under fluorescent lights. It began in a hallway that promised nothing and delivered less. A bland school corridor, beige linoleum scuffed to the mat of old soap, lockers the color of chicken soup, fluorescent tubes that hummed like bad advice. George knew it was Lincoln High, even though the plaque by the office door said, "Welcome to something else." He could smell the floor wax and the sawdust they used for vomit in '71. He could taste chalk. At the end of the corridor, a drinking fountain ran and ran, a thin silver thread. The water made no sound. "Evelyn?" he called. His voice was small, a pencil left too long in the sharpener. She was there, a little to the left, in her green sweater from college. Her hair was the old halo brown, not the beautiful white he knew now. She looked at him the way people look at buildings the day before demolition. "Don't drink," she said. "I'm not thirsty," he said. Behind them, a door creaked open on the gym. The sound was the sound of their first dance, the slow unspooling of the needle into the groove. He could hear the record they had loved. "Since I Fell for You," saxophone like a throat clearing. He went to the door because they always had. Inside the gym, the lights were off. The waxed floor shone green like a lake. Bleachers folded up to the walls were dark mouths. In the center of the floor stood a single wooden chair. It had their apartment's hall closet label tied to one rung with twine. It said, Album, 1970-1979. He sat. He hadn't meant to sit. The chair was cold through his trousers, and then it was warm, like a lap. A projector coughed to life without a projector being there. The air in front of him filled with light. Slides, one after the other. A summer at Lake Huron. The Esso raccoon. The motel neon saying sleep with the L burned out so it begged instead. Evelyn laughing with a paper cup. Evelyn crying with a napkin. Johnny's birth. Johnny's wrist in a cast. A blue Chevelle. A ticket stub from Springsteen 78. The slides sped up. The light warmed his face. It smelled like dust and ozone. Stop, he said. The light stopped on an image that had no business being anywhere. The hallway of their apartment, the present hallway lit the way it looks when you get up to pee at 3 a.m. The front door was locked. He could see the chain. And still, the black space under the door breathed in and out as if the night in the stairwell were practicing. The breath fogged the inside of the door. Evelyn's hand slid into his. We should wake up, she said. Okay, he said. He couldn't make it happen. The drinking fountain out in the corridor hissed its thin silver hiss. Something clicked in the gym's rafters. A rope drifted down, gentle as a spider's thought, and brushed the chairs back like a hand. He pulled hard on the dream like you do on a coat that doesn't want to leave your arm. He woke with his jaw clenched and his hands open, palms bitten by fingernails. Ev, he said, throat raw. I had it too, she whispered. She was already sitting up. The room was exactly as they had left it. The clock with red numbers, 3:07, the shape of his suit in the closet like a man pretending to be a suit, the street lamp writing its pale graffiti on the ceiling, and still, somewhere, water ran. Kitchen? He said, swinging his feet to the floor. The old floor greeted him with a familiarly impolite pop. They padded out past the dresser, past the wedding photo that for an instant seemed to move, her veil breathing in a breeze that wasn't there, down the short hall that had known their footsteps for 44 years, to the kitchen where the radio sat like a good dog. The faucet was off. The sink was dry. The water was not water. It was the sound of the building, awake when it shouldn't be, pipes clicking below them and above them as if the place had swallowed a watch. The sound drifted toward the front door. They looked at the deadbolt. It faced them like a good student. The chain had been slid across, and still the black space under the door breathed, in and out. Cold crept along the floor and put its hands around their ankles. Draft, George said, but the words sounded like clothes that didn't fit. Evelyn touched the chain. Her fingertip came away wet, as if the metal had been licked. They stood like that for a long time, two old people and a piece of metal, waiting for the story to decide what it was. Morning put a yellow on everything that did not feel like apology so much as insistence. The kitchen smelled like coffee because George made it smell like coffee. He measured the grounds with the old dented scoop, 2 flat per cup. Flat meant generous because he was that kind of man. And he set the radio to the station that pretended the world had stayed on the bandstand. Evelyn set 2 placemats, the ones with lobsters that their granddaughter said were so vintage, which meant a little ugly, but kindly. I dreamed about Lincoln, she said when the first cup steamed. Me too. He put the sugar bowl between them, the one with the crack that never quite became a break. The fountain, the gym, she said, the chair, the label, he said. Album, 1970 to 1979, she finished, and they met eyes the way people do when the world has done something impolite. They didn't speak of the breathing under the door because people their age understood that to name a thing too early is to help raise it. He went to the hall closet to get the broom because the light along the baseboards looked like it needed explaining. He pulled the chain on the closet's old light, the one that had a personality and not a switch. The top shelf looked back at him like a museum shelf. The box with the album sat there exactly where he had put it. Label in his careful block letters. Album, 1970-1979. There was a faint ring on the lid where something wet had sat and then changed its mind. He reached up for the box. The cardboard was colder than cardboard deserves to be. Don't bring it down, Evelyn said behind him. He froze with his hands on the lid. Why not? Because I don't want to know what's not in it. He put the box back. They walked the apartment like people walking through a school after everyone's gone home. The living room with its crocheted blanket and its recliner that farted when you sat, the little hallway where their son had once braced his feet and pushed himself along like a sled, the bathroom with its tile that had never learned to be straight, the bedroom again, nothing wrong and everything wrong. At 10:30, Evelyn went to see Ruth down the hall because you do not ask the doctor about breathing doors. You ask a woman whose life has been 60 years of knowing when to put salt and when to put sugar. Ruth opened before the third knock as if she had been standing there with her ear to the ordinances of fate. She wore a robe that looked like a cloud had lost its way. Her apartment smelled like mothballs and fresh bread because she baked on Wednesdays when the paper came late. "Morning, Ev," she said. "You look like you forgot a name." "We had a dream?" Evelyn said. "The same one." "In this building," Ruth said, not asking. "Of course you did." Ruth made tea strong enough to teach a lesson and sat them at her little table with the doily that had survived more presidents than either of them. "This place holds on," she said, not looking at them, but at the hallway beyond their shoulders. "It's an old building. It remembers, sometimes it gives back." "What?" George said, because he was the one who said that sort of thing in rooms like this. "Sounds," Ruth said. "Drafts, music you didn't turn on, feet that aren't rude but aren't yours. The thing is not to ask what it is. The thing is to keep your manners. If it knocks, you say you're not receiving. If it breathes under your door, you sweep salt along the threshold." "Salt?" Evelyn repeated, skeptical but relieved to have something to do that wasn't fear. "We have salt. And Samhain," Ruth added. "Don't play records after midnight." We don't," George said, and lied a little because sometimes when his knees were unkind, he'd put on Otis at 12:03 and let the needle hold his pain for him. Ruth's clock on the shelf ticked with a big grandfather confidence that made the apartment feel smaller. She watched the second hand do the same thing over and over and yet somehow mean it. "Who lived here before you?" she asked. "Before us?" Evelyn said. "A woman, I think." "Two," Ruth said. "A mother and a daughter. Back when they were still letting people smoke in the hall like sinners in a speakeasy. The daughter would run the halls in her socks. The mother would cry at the sink. People did that then. Maybe they still do. Anyway," she looked at Evelyn as if to adjust her focus. "You brought something back with you from that dream. Something you both touched. Don't touch it again." "What if we didn't touch anything?" George said. "You touched it by looking," Ruth said simply. "That's how old places work." She sent them home with a coffee tin full of salt and a recipe for lemon bars, as if the balance of the world depended on the right ratio of sugar to zest. Perhaps it did. At dusk the city made its little sounds like a cat settling. A far siren did its best not to frighten anyone. Children thumped somewhere 2 floors up, a choreography older than television. George sprinkled salt in a neat line inside the front door because he was a man who could lay a bead of caulk straight, and salt is like caulk for the spirit if you believe your neighbor. Evelyn set the radio to low and put a steak knife under her pillow because her grandmother had done that on storm nights in Indiana, and the bed had never blown away. They didn't speak of the breathing. They set out their pills in little cups and made a joke about how the blue one was a blueberry in a farm of oats. They fell asleep too easily. The dream did not wait for midnight. It came as they were getting their coats in a hallway that did not belong to anyone they had met. The walls had the painted cinder block calm of a hospital. The exit sign glowed over a door that did not lead to the street, but to a corridor full of payphones. Each payphone rang once, a little hurt bark, and then stopped. Evelyn didn't want to answer any of them, but her hand lifted on its own in the lost habit of quarters and dimes. "Hello?" she said to no phone. Down the corridor, a light flickered. It came from the old school library. She could smell paste and globes. The library had a table set with their apartment's plates. The plates held their old life, a gas station napkin, the metal key fob from the Motel 6 that had once been a 5, a train ticket to a place that no longer had a train. In the center of the table sat the photo album, the one from the closet, the cardboard of it gone back to tree. A bookmark stuck out, one of the blue tickets from the roller rink where they had once tried and failed to ride backwards. "Don't," George said. He put his hand over hers on the album's cover. The room's far wall breathed. Not the door, the wall itself. Paint ballooned and sank like a lung. From behind it came the slow scratch of someone who has been in the wrong room too long. The scratch spelled a thing that was not letters. "Let me in." "Wake up," Evelyn said very calmly, like a nurse to a patient who has asked permission to die. They could not. The library's exit sign flickered and died. The phones in the corridor rang and rang and rang. When they woke, it was because something had moved the salt. The line at the door was broken in 2 places, like footsteps that had reconsidered politeness. On the floor, just inside the door, sat the photo album. The label still read Album 1970-1979. The cardboard was damp with the kind of damp that knows the names of basements. "I didn't bring it out," George said, voice small and sober. "Neither did I," Evelyn said. "They did not touch it. They got 2 spatulas from the drawer like it was a hot pan and slid one under, one over, trays for a thing they did not want, and maybe did. They carried it back to the closet. The closet light snapped on like applause. "Top shelf," Evelyn said. He lifted it higher than was reasonable for a man of his knees and put it down on wood that had been worn smooth by boxes that meant more than their contents. When he turned back, The apartment had changed the way rooms change when a cloud crosses the sun. It was darker by a fraction of a shade. Shadows had edges they had not practiced. The hallway to the bedroom seemed an inch longer than it had been, as if the building had taken a breath and decided to keep some of it. "Tea?" Evelyn said, because you cannot say exorcism in a place with a crocheted blanket. He set the kettle on. It did not click. It sighed and then went quiet, as if listening. The radio, which had been off, came on with a voice from another station. The announcer sounded like the man who had done late nights in '79 when the snow had kept them from the New Year's party, and they had danced in the kitchen in their socks instead. "Good evening," the voice said. "Welcome back." "We didn't go anywhere," George said aloud, and the radio laughed kindly, the way you laugh when a child says he can keep the ocean in a pail. That night, the apartment decided it had hallways it had not told them about. George got up to pee at 2:30 and walked into a corridor where the bathroom should have been. The corridor smelled like chalk and floor wax and the faint iron of pennies. Fluorescent lights buzzed over him like flies that had learned to pray. A drinking fountain ran and ran. He looked down and saw that he was in his bedroom slippers, and that the floor under them was the apartment's oak, but that the oak had decided to pretend to be linoleum because it had been politely asked by the century. He turned around to tell Evelyn to bring the salt. The bedroom was gone. The corridor went both directions into the kind of dark that does not make a big fuss about itself. "Ev," he said, and the word went flat against the cinder block and sat there like a moth. A locker door somewhere clanged the way 2 nickels do in a glass jar. The drinking fountain stopped. Footsteps approached at the speed of a careful visitor. George could tell old mechanic's ear that there were 2 people. One had a slight drag to the left foot, a small old injury remembered like a song. The other placed their feet the way dancers do when they are done with making it look like effort. He knew those feet. He had taught the drag foot how to climb a ladder. He had kissed the dancer's ankle in a motel with a bedspread that looked like televisions argue. He should have been afraid. He felt something else, a sorrow so clean it made the lights brighter. The footsteps stopped just beyond the reach of the fluorescent. He could see the shoes. One pair were his old brown Rockports, salt-stained from the winter of '91. The other were hers white Keds with a dot of green paint on the left toe from a morning she had thought the kitchen could be a field. "Ev," he said again. 2 versions of her stepped into the light. One wore the blue housecoat and the present-day hair, white and beautiful like driftwood. She looked like Evelyn, and also like a photograph that had learned how to breathe. The other wore the green sweater and the young hair and the face that had broken him open when he was 20. They stood side by side the way people do in old Polaroids when they do not know where the picture will end. "Don't drink," the young one said. "Don't listen," the older one said. He closed his eyes because suddenly he could not hold so much of his own life at once. When he opened them, the hall was the hall. The bathroom, a little embarrassed at its momentary absence, stood where it should. The nightlight with the blue sailboat glowed its penny-sized glow. He stood there a long time until the shame of his body reminded him of the reason he had left the bed. He did not tell Evelyn because he did not want to give the apartment too much encouragement. In the morning, the apartment gave them a gift. Silence. No radio laughing by itself. No faucet practicing rain. The breath under the door was still there, but fainter, like a child who had cried himself sleepy. They walked to the window and watched the bus stop do its little play. A young man in a denim jacket stomped his feet and looked at his phone, which was a thing that made Evelyn feel both relief and pity. Relief that she did not need to learn it, and pity that she would not get to live the 1,000 small miracles it contained. A woman with a stroller swayed without knowing she swayed, the ancient dance of keep the baby from naming the world too quickly. A crow rode the power line like a thought. "I'm being foolish," George said. "Salt in closets, dreams like movies." "Foolishness is a way of being alive," Evelyn said. "The worst thing is to be so sensible that nothing can happen to you." He looked at her the way he had looked at her in the Chevelle when they were 29, and the road to summer leaned into them like a secret. "Marry me again," he said. "I will," she said, and they grinned like conspirators, and for a few minutes the apartment was precisely the right size. They were still smiling when the doorbell rang. No one they knew used the bell. People who loved them knocked with the familiarity of laundry. The bell was for deliveries and strangers and messages that come folded in government envelopes. George went to the door. He did not open it. He pressed his ear to the wood the way boys do when they are not quite brave enough to be the kind of man they wished they had had. On the other side, nothing moved. The hall had the sound of the building's breath, that old man sound that newer places try to shame out of themselves. He slid the chain back very slowly so that the noise of it would be smaller than any idea it might give the world. He opened the door. No one stood there, but on the doormat lay something from the hall closet that should not have known how to leave its shelf. The roller rink ticket bookmark. It was damp. The blue had bled the way blue does when it remembers lakes. Behind it, on the dust of the hallway runner, 2 sets of footprints stood in perfect mirror, coming from nowhere to their threshold and not going back. One was his, worn at the outer heel. One was hers, the left toe still with its green paint dot. "Ev," he said without turning. His voice was steady the way voices are steady when they have decided to be brave because someone else will hear if they aren't. She came to him and stood with her shoulder against his, the unit of measure they had used for hard news since '74. "Close it," she said. He did. He slid the chain. It clicked like a promise people make to themselves in the dark. From the other side of the door came the sound of the chain sliding again. They did not flee. Old people do not flee the way movies want them to. They tidy. They make sandwiches. They put on the good sweater. They prepare to outlast what can be outlasted. Evelyn boiled eggs. She buttered toast. She put 2 apples on a plate without knowing why she had chosen apples. George found the flashlight that had seen so many storms its battery had the self-esteem of a veteran. He put a chair under the doorknob because that is what you do in motels, and a chair is a prayer with legs. At dusk, the hallway outside their apartment lost its mind politely. The motion sensor lights flicked, and then rested in a low amber like a fever had decided to be someone's mother. Ruth's door opened and closed quietly. Somewhere a TV gave the news the same voice it had given the weather 40 years ago, as if both were the same kind of thing. They sat on the couch with the crocheted blanket folded like a flag between them and listened to the apartment breathe. The radio did not come on. The kettle did not sigh. The old clock's red numbers sneaked up the way foxes cross fields that once were farms. "Are we frightened?" Evelyn asked, and the way she asked it made it a philosophical question, not a request for a diagnosis. "Yes," George said, "but not like I've been frightened before. I'm frightened like a church that just realized who it's been praying to." She took his hand under the blanket. "I dreamed we were young at the Esso," she said. "I could smell the gasoline like pennies in rain. You were so handsome I wanted to buy the town to give it to you. And then I realized it was the wrong station, and the pumps were full of water. I dreamed of the gym," he said, "and a chair, and a rope that came down like a spider." They sat without speaking until the building, a kindly old landlord when the rent's on time, exhaled. The lights went out, not with a bang, but with the gentle resignation of a man who sits down before he meant to. The apartment was dark the way a theater is dark after the lights go and before the curtain decides who it is. In the not-quite silence, something moved down the hall. It did not walk. It did not slither. It did what night does when it finds a room with a window that forgot to close its eyes. The flashlight's beam shook once in George's hand, and then held. The circle of light slid along the hallway wall, across the frames of their grandchildren, across the corner where the paint always peeled in humidity, across the door to the hall closet, which was now slightly ajar. "Did you—" he began. "I didn't," she said. He lifted the beam into the closet. The top shelf was empty. The album was on the floor of the closet, open to a page of pictures that had never been taken. Their wedding, in the school gym rather than the church, the cake, a stack of tires with frosting, the minister, Ruth's late husband Harold, who had not been a minister and had been very proud of that fact. In the last photograph they stood in their present living room, older, but the room's windows looked out on a parking lot that had been torn up in '85. Everything was wrong in ways that were almost generous. Evelyn crouched and touched the margin of the page with a finger. "This is a trick," she said softly, not to George, but to the apartment, to the year, to the muscle memory of the building itself. "You don't get to have us by offering us the past." The closet door swung to with a polite click as if to say, "We'll talk later." George stood and felt the old ache in his knee like a tide. He clicked off the flashlight because a light is sometimes an insult. He listened. The apartment listened back. From the front door, the chain slid again. Not across or down or up. Sideways, as if it were being taught a new way to be a door. Evelyn reached for his hand. "Stay with me," she said. "I'm here," he said. The radio came on with a whisper, a station between stations where people live who aren't ready to be ghosts. A woman sang a lullaby in a language neither of them could place. It sounded like the sound train tracks make in July when the sun goes and the iron remembers being mountain. The song ended. A voice in their bedroom, or in the radio, or in the building's old stomach, said very clearly, "Let me in. It's cold." "Ruth?" Evelyn called, because she was a woman of manners to the end. The voice did not answer. The front door handle turned slowly, like a lesson. The chain held. Something put its eye to the peephole from the outside and looked in. They could feel it. They did not move. They did not speak. They did not breathe the way people do when they are pretending to be furniture. The peephole darkened and brightened and darkened again, as if the thing on the other side had not yet learned to blink. Then the chain, which had been steadfast as a wedding vow, slid to the end of its track, lifted itself, and set itself down on the linoleum with the care of a nurse putting a sleeping baby in a crib. The handle turned. The door opened 2 inches and stopped, polite, expectant, like a salesman in 1964 with a vacuum and a smile. "Don't," Evelyn said, but the don't was not to the door. It was to the part of them that wants to know where old hallways go. On the other side of the narrow opening, the hall was not the hall. It was the corridor from the dream, the lockers, the humming, the fountain's thin silver to nowhere. A small wet boot print appeared on their side of the threshold, then another, then a third, child-sized. They had not had a daughter. "Close it," George said. Evelyn reached. Her hand met air like breath. The door swung wider on its own. Cliffhanger. As the door yawns to the dream corridor, a child's voice from within the apartment whispers, inches from Evelyn's ear, using a name she hasn't heard spoken in 40 years. "Miss Eveline, you forgot to take attendance." To be continued in episode 2, Footsteps in the Hall.